Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Sunday School Review. This week's Sunday School lesson is entitled Noah Builds an Altar, and is taken from Genesis, the 8th chapter, verses 13 through 22, and the 9th chapter, verses 11 through 13. We are still in the book of Genesis, and Moses is the author. Now, the book of Genesis means the book of the beginning or the origin of the human family. Now, this lesson has two outlines. The first outline is Noah's situation. The second, and that's verses 13 through 22 of chapter 8. And the second outline is God's response, and that's Genesis, the 9th chapter, verses 11 through 13. Now, let's take a look at our first outline here, which is Noah's situation. Now, at this particular time, we're going to look in the 6th chapter of Genesis. We're going to read there and tell you what the situation was, because the first outline says the situation. Now, in the 6th chapter of Genesis, and we're going to start at the 5th verse. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And God repented, and it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and of the creeping things, and of the fowl of the air, for it repented me that I had made them. And verse 8 says, But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And we're going to also read verse 12. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted his ways upon the earth. So this is, as we talked last week, a continuation of the consequences of sin. Last week's lesson we talked about the first murder. Cain killed his brother because of jealousy and envy. And as the population grew, so did sin. To the point where we just read in the 6th chapter of Genesis, that the entire world was corrupt. The entire world was corrupt, but for one person. And as a result, God had said it had repented him that he had made man. So God, in the process of cleansing the earth, he brought a great flood to cleanse the earth. And every living creature that had breath in their body died, but 8 individuals: Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives was the only living survivors after the flood. Now, Noah, God instructed Noah to build an ark, in which he did, and God caused the animals and creeping things to enter the ark. Noah took them in. And God instructed Noah as to when to go into the ark, and he closed the door. And it began to rain. Okay. The Noah was in this box, in this ark, for a little over a year, basically a year and 2 months. The scripture tells us, in which we're going to read it in the very first verse of our lesson, which is verse 13. And it came to pass in the 601st year. So Noah was 600 years old, 600. And on the first day of the month, okay. So basically, and when he came out of the ark, he was 601. So the point is this: Noah was 600 years old when the flood came. When he came out of the ark, he was 601. So Noah was in the ark for a little over a year. Again, with all these animals and everything, he was cooped up in this box for a year and 2 months. That's a long time, okay, to be in that box until all flesh, everything that had breath in their body, creeping things, they died. So God cleansed the earth because of the entire world. The entire earth was corrupt, as we just read in Genesis, in Genesis, the 6th chapter. So God punished them. He punished the people, and everybody lost their lives, but the individuals in the ark, the 8 individuals: Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. I just pointed out verse 13, and let's read it in its entirety. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the first of the month, the waters was dried up from off the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. Okay, so 1 year later, Noah took the covering off, and he looked, and behold, the face of the earth was dry. It was dry. But now we go to verse 14, we read, and in the second month of the 7th and 20th year of the month, well, the earth dried. Okay, so as a result, he stayed in there for another 2 months. As I said, he took the cover off, and it was dry, but he stayed a couple of months stayed a couple of months. It says the earth was dried. Okay, now let's go to verse 15 and 16. And God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth out of the ark, thou, thy wife, and thy sons, and their wives with thee. Okay, so God again instructed Noah as to when to go into the ark before the rain started, before the earth was cleansed. And God instructs him as to when to depart out of the ark. It says here, God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth out of the ark, thou and thy wife and thy sons and thy sons' wives. Okay, so the idea here is we need to wait on instructions from God. Don't be too impatient. We need to be patient. and wait on the command from God. As I said, Noah did not depart from the ark until God gave the command. In verse 15, 16, God spake unto Noah, says, go forth. Okay, so God gave the command as to when to exit the ark. Okay, so we go there, and now just for this point of information, says Scripture give the names of Noah's sons as Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now Shem was the godly line. That was the godly line. But anyway, we know the name of obviously Noah. We know the name of his three sons. However, we don't know the name of Noah's wife was not named. We don't know her name, nor do we know any of the sons' wives' name. Okay, but that just a point of information. But okay, let's look at verse 17. Verse 17 says, bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl, of cattle, of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful and multiply upon the earth. That was the command that was given to the creatures, living creatures, that was brought into the ark. And as I said, those were the only things that survived the great flood. Those living things that was in the ark. Everything else died. Okay? And so that was the command to be fruitful and multiply was given to the living things. Okay, now let's look at verse 18. And Noah went forth, and his sons, and his wife, his sons, and their wives with him. Okay, so in verse 19, every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth, after that kind went forth out of the ark. Okay, so as I said, the only living things that survived this great flood was in the ark. If you were not in the ark, you did not survive. That's the bottom line. That's just plain and simple. Okay, now, here's where we get into the meat of our lesson, which the subject is Noah builds an altar. Noah builds an altar, not an altar. Okay, so, and this is verse 21. I'm sorry, verse 20, building an altar. Now, the lesson that we've had so far is talking about early sacrifices and altars. And as I said last week, the altars and sacrifices predated the Mosaic law. It predated the law of Moses. And it came before. So they were so people was offering, building altars and offering sacrifices before the law of Moses, before the Mosaic law was given. Okay, so that's why we talk about early altars and sacrifices. That is before the law was introduced. Okay, so building an altar, verses 20 and 22. And Noah built an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and every clean fowl, and offered burnt offering on the altar. So let's go back. Noah built an altar. So after exiting the ark, as I said, being cooped up in that enclosed box for a little over a year, with all these animals and other living things, the first thing that Noah did when his feet finally touched dry ground was to give worship to God. He said, Noah built an altar. So the first thing he did, his first action was to worship God, okay? To worship God for his mercy. Because as I said, the only surviving, survivors was on the ark. So everything else died. So God showed mercy to Noah and his family. Just one family was saved. The world was populated. It talks about the fact the world was populated, and only one family, a man and his wife, and his three sons and their wives. That's it. So God showed mercy. So the first thing that Noah did was to worship God by erecting an altar to worship him because God had blessed him, had brought him out. God had brought him out. And that's the whole idea. That was an ordeal. I mean, not to even speak of the people that died, but it was still an ordeal for him to be in this confined area for, as I said, a little over a year, and everybody else died. The only living survivors. So God brought him out, him and his family. So God showed mercy on him. So, yes, the first thing, his first call to action was to worship God, to build an altar to worship God. And it says, an offering of every clean beast. Again, pointing to the fact that you just don't offer anything. That was clean and unclean beasts on the ark. Otherwise, that's the only way that anything survive, any living thing survived. That there was on the ark. Yeah, there were unclean animals on the ark. But you notice Noah did not sacrifice any unclean animal. Said Noah built an altar and took of every clean beast and every clean fowl. Again, pointing to the sacrifice should be of best quality. He said, well, we just going to sacrifice anything. We're just going to sacrifice anything on the altar. No. Again, of every clean beast and every clean fowl, offered a burnt offering on the altar. The best. The best. Okay. And verse 21 said, and the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite anymore every living thing as I have done. As I said, that this is leading up to the covenant that the Lord is going to make. Okay, so but the point of the fact in verse 21, and God smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, is the thing about the sweet savor is that the Lord accepted. The Lord was approved the sacrifices that Noah made. So the sacrifices, when they are made, they go up to the Lord as a sweet savor. Okay, so verse 21 is just telling us that the Lord accepted Noah's sacrifice because, go back to 20, because it was acceptable. That's the very reason that Cain offerings was not accepted, whereas Abel's was, because Cain offering did not meet God's standard. Now Cain was mad, and Azrael killed his brother because he was jealous because his brother's offering was accepted. So we see Noah's offering was accepted because it was proper, whereas in last week's lesson Cain's wasn't, because Cain just brought an offering. It wasn't from the first fruit or anything like that. It was just an offering. And this lesson in 20 tells you it was of the clean. Again, that was clean and unclean animals on the ark. But Noah didn't sacrifice any unclean, because that sacrifice would not have been accepted. And verse 21 said, the Lord smelled a sweet savor, which means the sacrifice was accepted because it met God's standards. And that's what our service, our worship has to meet his standards. If they don't meet his standards, they're not going to be accepted. That's just bottom line. Okay. And we see that in this week's lesson here, where when it said he accepted, it was a sweet smelling savor. So he accepted the offering, and he makes the point here that neither will I again smite anymore everything living as I have done. And this is where God makes an unconditional covenant with Noah and his descendants, all humanity. So now, and we're not going to talk much about covenants, but there are several covenants. This is one of the major covenants that is called the Noahic covenant. That is the covenant that God made with Noah and his descendants. That is mankind. Okay, so God made an unconditional covenant. There was no condition that man had to make. Now, an unconditional covenant, we call it a unilateral. We could call it a unilateral covenant or unconditional. Is the other type of covenant is a conditional covenant, which is a promise for a promise. If you do so and so, I will bless you. If you do this, I will not bless you. That's a conditional covenant. Your blessing is dependent upon what you do. If you don't hold up your end of the bargain, I'm not obligated to hold up my end of the bargain. But this covenant is an unconditional covenant. Is a one-sided covenant. God made an unconditional covenant with Noah and his descendants. As I said, it's called the Noahic covenant. Okay, so let's look at verse 22. Now, he said he will not again, at 21, this is 21, he will not again smite everything living as I have done before. Now we go into 22. It says, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Okay. So basically, what he's saying here is, I will not interrupt the natural cycle. I will not interrupt the natural cycle. Okay, the natural order will continue. This is what this verse 22 is talking about. The natural order will continue. okay, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. In other words, I'm not going to interrupt the natural order. The natural order will not be interrupted. I will not do this. This is my covenant, a promise, agreement with Noah and his descendants, that is mankind. Okay. And we know this. God is going to honor his promise. He's going to honor his promise. Like I said, it was a unconditional covenant, okay, with the human family. Now that was what God promised to do. And the next outline is God's response. The first one was Noah's situation. And we talked about that. And the fact that his life was spared. Basically his family's life was spared. And that's it. Just those 8 individuals that was aboard the ark. Okay. Now God's response, and this is the covenant. This is the unconditional agreement that God made with Noah and his descendants. Let's go to verse 11. This is the next outline. This is in chapter 9 of Genesis. Verse 11 reads, "And I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood, neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth." Now, okay, let's talk about that. Okay, now we do have rain. It does rain, but God promises that my covenant with you, and as I said, with his descendants, neither shall all flesh be cut off anymore by the waters of a flood. So the flood cleansed the earth, cleansed the entire earth. So he said, no more will I do this by water. Now cut off any more by water of the flood, neither shall any more be a flood to destroy the earth. So as I said, the flood destroyed the earth. It cleansed the earth. It cleansed the earth. So basically, as I said, for Noah and his family, this is a new beginning. This is a new beginning because every living creature was wiped out. So we start a new beginning with Noah and his family, his sons and their wives. We start a new beginning. Okay. So this is not going to happen again, not by water. And I'm going to make a promise to you. And as I said, God is true to his promise. Basically, he said, you ain't got to promise me nothing. This is a one-sided deal. This is a unilateral covenant, not a bilateral covenant, not a promise for a promise. A bilateral covenant is a promise for a promise. I promise to do this if you promise to do that. No, this is not a covenant like that. This is a unilateral, a unconditional covenant. Okay, so that was verse 11. Let's go to verse 12. And God said, "This is the token of the covenant which I made between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations." Now, okay, that's why I said this covenant is not just to Noah, it's to Noah and his descendants, to humanity. Okay, so this is God's promise. And the sign of this covenant, or the token, it says token, which is a sign, is a bow. And we're going to get to that in the next scripture, or the rainbow. Okay, now as I said, sometimes it rains, it storm, and generally when you see the rainbow, you see the after rain. So that tells us that God's promise still stands. I've seen rainbows many times, and that's been a long, long time ago since this promise was made to Noah and his descendants. That's been a long time, many years, hundreds of years, about thousands of years. But the rainbow can still be seen after a rain to let us know that God promise still stands. When you see that, that rainbow, that's a token that my promise still holds. Okay, my promise still stands, and it says, "I will make between you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generation." Now, we know what perpetual means. Perpetual means continue, just continue, continue. Now, but perpetual talking about as long as this world stands. Now, we understand that it is not going to go past eternity, in eternity. So, and I think it's in Revelation and probably some other situation where there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. So, this covenant is not going to extend to the new heaven and the new earth. It extends to this existing earth. As long as the earth exists as it is now, this covenant will be in effect. That's what it means for perpetual generations. So long as this world that we live in today, that so long as this world exists, the covenant stands for perpetual generations. Okay, that's what that means there, for perpetual generations. And as I said, when it rains, sometimes you can look up, oh, there's a bow. There's a bow in the sky, meaning that the covenant still in effect. Okay, verse 13. So I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a token of a covenant between me and the earth. As I said, it's a sign. It's a sign that God's covenant still stands, still in effect with humanity, still in effect. Okay, and we know that God is faithful to His word. And just like you can look up in the sky after a rain and see the bow, you know God is faithful. God is faithful to His word. God is faithful. So no matter what storm comes, I mean, it could be storms of life and natural storms, they're not going to take us out by the flood. There's never going to be a situation like that which destroys the earth. Okay. And the bow that we see after the rain tells us that God is faithful to His word, and His promise to not destroy the earth again with water still stand. And the fact that this lesson here stands for, because of the fact that God was merciful. He showed mercy on Noah and his descendants and his family. The first thing He did was to build an altar to worship God for His mercy. And God is true to His word. God keeps his word. He will not fail. And we can see, we can point to the bow, and we can look at the bow and say, God is faithful. He's faithful to his word. And we'd like to thank you for watching today. We ask you to join us next week for our Sunday School review. The subject, Noah builds an altar on dry ground, on dry land, to worship God. Thank you for watching.